A news report has appeared claiming a major breach in the Aadhaar system. HuffPost India says the database has been compromised because of a patch that allows unauthorized entities to generate Aadhaar numbers at will. The report, done after a 3-month investigation, claims this patch is available for as little as 2,500 rupees. To speak more on this, I'm joined now by Aman Sethi, Editor-in-Chief at HuffPost India. I'm also speaking with Ananth Padmanabhan, a fellow at CPR, Nikhil Pahwa, editor at Media Nama, and security researcher Anand Venkatanarayanan. Welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us. Aman, let's just first begin by understanding what this story is and its impact. Can you take us through the process of coming to the story which makes a really major claim?
Sure. So the way to think about the Aadhaar enrollment system is that Aadhaar basically allowed private operators to enroll people to the Aadhaar database. To ensure that this was done with some degree of method, they put in place certain security measures. What our story about this software patch indicates is that a freely available bundle of software that was being WhatsApped from person to person essentially overrides most of these security protocols. For example, the protocol that requires that enrollment operator enroll people by authenticating himself with his own biometrics has been overridden. The sensitivity of the iris scanner has been overridden. There was a requirement that all enrollment computers be linked to a GPS dongle so that you can ensure that the enrollment is being done in the physical location that the enrollment center claims it is in. That GPS link has been overridden. So essentially, you have a situation which throws open enrollment to pretty much anyone who can access this patch.
So to what end is it being used as per your investigations? What is this patch being used for?
So what we've been able to establish thus far is that this patch was being used by a series of private enrollment operators to enroll as many people as they could. So as we know, enrollment agencies were paid per enrollment, and they each had to have one authorized operator per computer. But by using this this patch, they could essentially run multiple enrollment machines, and that allowed them to increase the number of people they were enrolling. However, the experts that we've spoken to who've analyzed the patch have told us that this patch actually is quite sophisticated and is quite elegant and indicates a fairly high degree of programming knowledge, which suggests that it could be used for pretty much any purpose, particularly if someone has a sinister design to pollute the information in the Aadhaar database. We have not been able to establish those claims that this is being used for a sinister end. What we have been able to establish is that village level entrepreneurs were using this rampantly.
Okay, let me come to Nikhil Pahwa to understand the import of this story. Nikhil, you will remember that there was a story from the Tribune, several months ago, which said that details of the Aadhaar database was available for a fee. Now there is this other story which says that for a fee, and there is a software available which can let anyone create an Aadhaar number. How dangerous could this be?
Well, I think, Tamanna, the clear problem with the way this has been approached is that, the UIDAI was in a rush to enroll as many people as possible. And I'll allow Anand to explain how vulnerable the software is that such a patch has been actually developed for it. But what I would question is how many fakes are there in the UIDAI database and whether this allowed the enrollment of fakes into the system again for using in terms of cycling of funds or cycling of rations. How do we know that all the savings that are being claimed are actually accurate and there aren't more ghosts that have been created in the system? The other thing is that this is very similar to something that the UP police had reported I think sometime last year or earlier this year about the software being patched. And so if this vulnerability is still active, I would say that the UIDAI is remarkably incompetent, that they've not been able to shut something like this down. And this needs to be taken up by the government, saying that, how are you allowing a vulnerability to remain even after it's been reported on? We know UIDAI's history of filing cases against journalists, and I hope that Aman and his team don't get cases filed against them for doing what is right. But again, you have to wonder, how dangerous this entire system is if you can allow the addition of fake profiles and fake information into the system process. Because anyone who's enrolling people using this obviously doesn't want to follow the due process. So what are the kind of people that are being enrolled into the system? Is it possible to identify who's been enrolled by the system? Is it possible to remove them? Can there be some transparency from the UIDAI in terms of disclosures of all of these issues? I think the country needs to hold them accountable now.
I want to come to Anand Venkatanarayanan, one of the experts mentioned in the piece who has looked at the patch. Anand, I request you to start this at a very basic level by first telling us what a patch is and what this particular patch could do.
This is not the first time we have heard about this patch. The first time we have heard about this patch is not from HuffPost. It is basically from the UP Police by Mr. Triveni Singh, who reported on September 2017. Okay. At that point of time, whatever Aman has reported pretty much followed what the police had written in their FIR, which was presented in the Supreme Court also. So if you really understand enrollment is basically a process which converts a human being, which is you and me, into the Aadhaar database through a digitization procedure. So what it actually does is it takes your basic details and then your iris scan biometrics and pushes in the database so that when it actually submits it, there is a deduplication process. But the process that converts a physical human being into a digital entity is through a single gate. And that single gate is basically the enrollment software. So that's basically what it is all about. Now, there are two important sentries to ensure that everything is correct. The first important sentry is the operator himself, which we have historically heard has serious issues. The second important sentry into the Aadhaar castle is the enrollment software itself. So over a period of years, it has put in a lot of sophisticated measures to ensure that UIDAI can say with a reasonably accurate degree that an enrollment is done in a proper form. Okay, that's basically what it has obtained. So two things: one is process by humans and process by software. Now, the process by humans has been compromised. We know it. That's the reason why they are trying to move toward government organizations and stuff like that. But this particular patch was about compromising the enrollment software, so that all the security systems that UIDAI has put in place from 2009 incrementally over time has been reverted back. That's basically what it is all about.
Well, so as I understand it, simply put, this was an effort by some private operators to increase their efficiencies and thereby maximize whatever income they were making from enrollment. And I want to come now, of course, to Ananth Padmanabhan for more on this. The danger here seems to be that there may be fake IDs out there or ghost enrollments in the Aadhaar database. What could be the other dangers of this kind of a patch? To what end could it be used to compromise the entire database? I'll just come to Ananth and then I will come to you, Aman. Let me start with Ananth. Yeah.
Sure. I think I'll divide my response into parts. One is regarding this particular patch and the other is the broader Aadhaar ecosystem, which is what, in fact, my comments in the piece have also been largely on. So coming to the fact that, there is this patch and there is a possibility of fake enrollments, I think what this can result in is the possibility of large-scale noise into the database, right? And one of the major concepts around which data is sort of, organized and regulated is the idea of data integrity itself, right? And the fact that you have this patch and that you can enroll people potentially with fake IDs or ghost identities compromises the whole integrity of the digital identities project. I mean, today we all know the background in which we are talking about this, which is the fact that there is a petition pending reserved for orders where the constitutional validity of the Aadhaar scheme itself is under challenge. And in this constitutional validity proceedings, part of the contestation has been over data integrity and the guarantee that, you know, the database is secure. And we all remember the submissions which have been made by UIDAI in this regard, right? That the CIDR is, you know, in a physically secure location, that the best sort of protocols have been employed, and security standards have been deployed, and so on. But from the beginning, I think what critics have been maintaining is that the fear is much less to do with the CIDR as it exists in a centralized location and the security standards, and much more with the broader ecosystem. Which takes me to the second part of my response. The fear of private entities is not confined to enrollment. It also extends to authentication, and this is something that even I've been writing about for a fair bit. If you look at the Aadhaar project itself, right? I mean, from the beginning, the idea was to create a national digital identity. But in 2010 or somewhere around that, the UIDAI strategy overview document starts talking about private authentication as required for the sustainability of UIDAI, and the entire revenue base is built upon private actors and their ability through APIs to read into the CIDR for authentication. So coming to the stage of authentication again, you're talking about millions of, you know, endpoint devices and endpoint transactions, right? Where, for instance, if you last check the data released by UIDAI itself in August 2018, there are, I think, about 264 KYC user agencies and about 304 or 5 authentication user agencies. So all these agencies are in a position to read to the CIDR. So any sort of malware injected at the endpoint in any of these point of sale devices or biometric authentication devices can again, you know, cause vulnerability and data integrity and security issues. So overall, if you look at the Aadhaar ecosystem, the presence of private players has not been thought of at all in a careful enough manner, and they have expanded this.
So the government will say that they have already started fixing the problem in advance because private players are no longer enrolling. You have select specific areas where they're enrolling. Aman, you wanted to come in, and I'll also ask you a question even as you come in on what did you find in the prevalence of how much this patch was being used? Because I think our viewers should also understand who are the kind of people who could be using it. Is there some unseen force somewhere that's trying to infiltrate the Aadhaar system, or what is the ground reality that you found?
So I think that coming to let's address your question head on at the beginning. I think when it comes to prevalence, we're being very careful in the claims that we're making in this article, and we are only making claims that we can prove. When it comes to prevalence, the fact is that it is widely prevalent on hundreds, literally, of WhatsApp groups set up by these people who are these village-level entrepreneurs who are now all out of jobs. So you essentially have an army of young men with rudimentary computer skills but deep familiarity with the Aadhaar project who now have this patch on their hands and in many cases are figuring out ways to see if they can still use it. Okay. On this question of what is the significance, I think the significance is far broader than this story alone. I think the significance points to the fact that there are vulnerabilities in this framework that no one knows about until they come out in the form of these news articles. That the way that the system has been designed is completely opaque. So as common citizens, at no point are we being given any clear vision. There is no clear conversation on, hey, we want to set the system up. It has these benefits, but it also has these costs. So you have a government and a UIDAI that only talks about presumed reference to the possible costs. So what we mention in the story is that perhaps the most significant part of the story is not specifically this patch alone, because tomorrow you could have potentially another patch that that attaches onto another part of the framework that has potentially different repercussions. I think the major significance of this story is for the authorities to admit what every single software expert around the world says, which is no system is breach-proof. And the first step to securing the system is to acknowledge that every system has vulnerabilities. And I think if we as a society are aware of the vulnerabilities of systems, we can then make a kind of knowledgeable societal choice. Do we want this? Do we not want this? Which is what's happening right now in the court. And of course, we're all, we all believe in the wisdom of the courts. But we feel that the government and the UIDAI are clearly not playing with a straight bat if they're not putting everything in front of the court. And it's being left to all of us to grapple and find these problems. When we find them, the government will say, oh, we fixed this 3 months ago, or we fixed this 5 months ago, or we're just about to fix this. But that's really no way to talk about a project that literally affects every single Indian.
In fact, let's come to what a government functionary did recently. Yeah, Nikhil, you want to come in? I was just going to bring up R.S. Sharma's Aadhaar challenge, but I'll wait to hear from you first. Yes, Nikhil.
Yeah, Tamanna, there is one of the things that Aman just mentioned was that these VLEs have rudimentary skills. But at the same time, it's also been mentioned that this patch is very sophisticated. So I'm wondering, where did this patch originate from, if it has such sophistry, and how did these VLEs actually get access to it? Secondly, if the VLEs, if their access has actually been shut down and they're out of jobs, how are they still enrolling people using this patch? That shows that there is a fault in the way the UIDAI operates in terms of lack of awareness of how their own system is being used, in terms of lack of awareness of how this patch is actually, or even the inability to shut this patch down. Let's not forget that there was a terrorist in Pathankot, a Pakistani national, who was found with a valid Aadhaar card. There's been other people, miscreants. There's a Uzbek lady who was also found with a valid Aadhaar card. So who's actually seeded this and who's using it to create identities? How are they using this? I mean, this has to be questioned. Let's also not forget that there is no physical verification that happens with Aadhaar. This is a part of the design. They saw that just using software to enroll people with no actual verification, like you have in case of passports, would speed up the enrollment. It was a jugaad, so to speak. This jugaad has basically led us into a problem. So I would say that the entire database itself is questionable, it's problematic, and it's a huge national security risk right now. Because people will believe that someone is an Indian national if they have an Aadhaar card, even if this is being generated using the fake process like this.
No, though they specifically say that the Aadhaar card is not a proof of nationality. But you're right, Nikhil, I get your point, where effectively, practically, it is being used as your primary identity card.
My point is that people do accept it as a proof of identity, which it is not. They accept it as a proof of nationality, which it is not. It's not a proof of identity because there is no verification that happens. You can take, there's been a case where a fake driver's license has been used to create an Aadhaar as well. Aadhaar is not a proof of identity either. It's a proof of authentication.
Let me come to Anand Venkatanarayanan on one point that Nikhil made, that if this patch is, and there are plenty of comments in the piece, if this patch is seeming like a sophisticated piece of software, but the people effectively using it, as per this report, are people with very rudimentary skills. What does it tell you? Where is the patch originating from? What can we, what conclusion can we lead to on these 2 points?
Okay, so three things. Typically, there is the user of the patch, which is basically the Aadhaar enrollment operators. Then there is the distributors of the patch, which is what I call as Ring 2. So what we have seen is that there are YouTube videos publicly available. I mean, you can just Google on YouTube and you can see hundreds of such videos, which actually teach these operators how to use the patch, install, and gets things done, right? That's basically Ring 2 of the network. And there is actually Ring 1 of the network, who's basically the maker. We call it the maker, but we have never been able to figure out who it is. And so if you trace back the history of the patch, of the entire thing, right? There have been numerous cases from last September 2017. There was even one on Delhi on June 2018. So all police have been able to find out is the Ring 3 of the people, which is basically people are using. I think at the most they went to ring to the distributors. So if you look at the distributors, they actually advertise on YouTube with their phone numbers. There are hundreds of such guys. I mean, you can just look at it yourself. But I don't think there was never an attempt to go to ring one. I don't think there was any success in figuring out who actually made it. But one of the things that I noticed when HuffPost gave me the patch is we can do forensic analysis and just look at what is that it is trying to accomplish. It is pretty sophisticated patch. It can't be done by a person who is not knowledgeable about how UIDI works, how enrollment works, requires very specific and deep programming expertise. This is not your garden variety kind of a person who can do this. I mean, that I'm very, very sure about, because if you understand, I mean, look at what forensics is, right? Forensics is basically about looking at a crime scene and just trying to understand what has happened. And on some crime scenes, it's obvious the criminal is basically not a very sophisticated person. So you can find those kind of crimes like an OTP scam, you know precisely what it is. But this is a very different kind of a patch. It requires sophistication. And I'm not very sure it is done by some small end kind of a people. It's definitely someone with deep programming expertise. I don't think.
Yeah, so definitely merits investigation, because these are two important points. I want to quickly come to Ananth Padmanabhan on the fix. What can be done now? Nikhil seems to suggest that if there is a patch out there like this and there's no way of knowing of how much of the Aadhaar database is compromised, then we're dealing with a big question. What is the solution that the agencies, the appropriate agencies can look at? Ananth.
I think the difficulty now is that this project itself has become too big to fail in some sense, right? It's been built up in that sort of way. I think as far as an immediate, not a fix to this particular problem of enrollment, because part of it is also that a lot of enrollments have already been, I mean, most enrollments have been done, and let's see, going by the government data. I think on the authentication side, I think one has to now be really careful, and all private authentication must be put to a stop. I mean, I'm expecting that to emerge from probably even the Supreme Court verdict, maybe for procedural reasons, not so much substantive. But I think the real challenge is to now, take a step back and realize that, look, this project was meant for a particular purpose. It has gone way beyond that particular purpose for which it was meant. I mean, you start off saying that you need this particular identity in order to save up on deduplication of identities for state purposes, and then you expose it to private authentication and private enrollment agencies brought in. So I think the role of private actors in this entire ecosystem needs a complete reevaluation. Until it is revalued with the appropriate security safeguards, it must actually be put to a stop. That's been my view since 2017 on this.
Nikhil, let me come back to the question, because at the end of the day, a lot of people watching this perhaps are going to be wondering how much of a danger is it to them individually. And this is where I wanted to bring up R.S. Sharma's challenge from a couple of months ago, where he said, here's my Aadhaar number, do your worst, where effectively nothing really happened to him. And is that the big battle? And is that the reason why UIDAI doesn't respond to emails from journalists, or the government doesn't feel it necessary to actually respond seriously to reports like the one Aman Sethi's organization has put out? I'll come to Nikhil and then to you, Aman. Yes, Nikhil.
So look, the UIDAI, what we've seen is a lack of accountability and frankly rank irresponsibility from them when dealing with these issues, especially when they're filing cases against journalists. What you need to keep in mind in case of the system is that people can get compromised because their data is out there. Look, we've already seen that for 135 million plus people across 217 websites, data has been leaked online. Many people have been getting phishing calls asking them to link their Aadhaar number. Money has been siphoned off. This has been acknowledged by Arun Jaitley in Parliament. And he's mentioned the number of cases also where this has happened. We have to think about how many unreported cases there are around that. Once a person is compromised, they're compromised for the rest of their lives. And so you can never really link it back to one instance. What you need is the ability to change some factor of authentication, whether it is, let's say, if think of a username and ID. You can either get a new email address if your email gets compromised, or you can change your password if it gets compromised. In this case, you can't change either. You can't change your Aadhaar number, and you definitely can't change your biometrics. So once you're compromised for the rest of their lives. R.S. Sharma's email address could have been changed because of all the data about him that was out there, and someone explained that his password reset code was actually his frequent flyer number, which someone used in a chatbot that Air India had to determine R.S. Sharma's frequent flyer number by using his date of birth, his email address, and his mobile number. All of these factors can be combined together to compromise someone. So I'm saying just because R.S. Sharma wasn't harmed doesn't mean that he can't be harmed. In fact, even if he does get harmed, and I hope that doesn't happen, you can't link it back to this instance, because you never know when the harm is going to come, where it is going to come from.
Yes. No, absolutely. The point I was making, and Aman, please come in on this. The point I was making is the position that, government officials have taken, that this is safe and the onus is on others to prove it isn't.
So I think that the problem here is that I think the government, and it's not just this government, right? Because even the previous government, when the project was being rolled out, there were already people who were opposing it from the beginning, saying that it had not been completely conceptualized, that the repercussions were not being thought through, that the structure was not being discussed. I think that this is, I mean, unfortunately, is one of those kind of technocratic fantasies that makes governments not want to engage with their citizens. I think it's quite clear that this project is not a project for citizens, but it's a project that is being driven largely by all that it allows governments to do. So I think that is one of the reasons why they do not respond to journalists, because they actually don't have very good answers for this. And I think that when the answers do come, they come in the form of trying to undermine the credibility of organizations and reporters, rather than trying to address the questions head on.
Well, that was an important story after 3 months of investigation on HuffPo, India. Mr. Anand Venkatanarayanan wants to come in. Yes, Anand, quick point there.
Yeah. So one thing you need to understand, Tamanna, is that there is a fixed process for actually reporting issues to the government, and that is via a nodal entity called NCIPC. It is one of the most responsive organizations around. So it depends on whom you report to, and they usually acknowledge. And so what I've done when Aman actually gave me the patches, I basically told them this is my analysis, and I sent it to them, and they have acknowledged it. And over a period of time, we have reported many such issues across many places to NCIPC, and we have seen that things do get fixed over a period of time. So in this particular case, what happened was that Aman gave it to me somewhere around July, and I think I gave them a report in August and kind of slipped my mind and moved on with it. So the thing that I think he has to confirm is that whether the patch is still active and people are still using it, and I think that is a cause of concern. And if it is a cause of concern, I think the solution is on the UIDAI side itself. So if they want to do something about it, they can do about it. But I have no idea about why they don't want to do something about it. I mean,
I think the question is bigger. Maybe they will do something about it. Maybe they have. But have they felt the need to tell the public at large and journalists who are asking these questions about what they're doing? It's also a question of transparency and responsibility and seeming to address concerns as they crop up. Ananth said Aadhaar has perhaps become too big to fail. Well, in that case, the government authorities are the one that have to ensure that it is fail-safe. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today on this discussion.